When my son told me he was getting married, I remember my hands trembling slightly as I held the cup of tea. His voice was full of excitement, the kind that only love could bring. He said her name was Lily, a smart, kind, and beautiful woman he had met at work. I smiled, but deep down, something inside me whispered that things were about to change. I raised my son alone after his father passed away when he was just 12. Life wasn't kind to us. We didn't have fancy things, but we had each other. Every night after dinner, we'd sit together and talk about dreams, his school, his future, the places he wanted to see. And when he finally graduated and got a job, I thought my prayers had been answered. So when he told me he had found someone he wanted to spend his life with, I was happy. I was proud. But as he went on describing Lily and her family, how well off they were, how elegant her parents were, and how he was nervous about me meeting them, I felt a pinch of something I couldn't name. He said, "Mom, just be yourself, okay? They're a bit formal." I laughed softly. "Formal? I'm just your mother, not a queen." But he didn't laugh. He just looked away, nervous. That evening, I went to my small room and stood before the mirror. My reflection was honest. A woman in her late 50s, lines around her eyes that spoke of years of work and worry. My hands were rough from cleaning. My hair had silver strands that I no longer bothered to hide. But my heart was full. And I thought, if they could just see that, maybe they'd understand the kind of mother I was. The first meeting happened on a sunny Sunday afternoon. They had invited me to lunch at a fancy restaurant downtown. My son had offered to pick me up, but I insisted on taking the bus. I didn't want to trouble him. As I walked into the restaurant, I saw them sitting by the window, Lily, her parents, and my son, who immediately stood up when he saw me. "Mom, you made it," he said, smiling, though I could see the nervousness behind it. Lily's mother looked me up and down, her eyes resting on my old dress and the handbag I'd been using for years. Her father gave me a polite but distant nod. Lily, sweet as she was, smiled warmly and hugged me. "I'm so happy to finally meet you," she said. Her mother smiled too, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Carter, please, sit down. I hope you don't mind the place. My husband loves fine dining." "Oh, not at all," I replied softly. "It's beautiful. I've never been to a place like this before." That was the first mistake. I saw the flicker of amusement between her parents' eyes, a look that said, "She's not from our world." As the lunch went on, I stayed quiet, letting them talk. They discussed business, travel, art, things I knew little about. When they asked me what I did, I said simply, "I work as a consultant for a company. It keeps me busy." Her father said with mild surprise, "What kind of consulting?" "Oh, nothing big," I replied. "Guiding people, helping them make good decisions." They didn't ask further. I didn't mind. I was used to being invisible in rooms where pride spoke louder than kindness. When the waiter brought the bill, I reached for my purse out of habit. But Lily's father laughed. "Please, Mrs. Carter, this one's on us. Maybe next time when we visit your place, you can return the favor." I smiled, though his words stung a little. "Of course," I said softly. "I'll make something simple. Homemade meals always taste better than restaurant food." He didn't respond, just nodded. Later that evening my son called me. His voice was careful, like he didn't want to hurt me. "Mom, they really liked you, but they thought you were a bit too humble." I laughed quietly. "Too humble? Is that even a flaw?" He sighed. "You know what I mean. They're just different. That word echoed in my mind for days. I tried not to think about it, but every time I looked at my reflection, I wondered if my simple clothes or soft tone had embarrassed him. Weeks passed, and the wedding planning began. I wanted to help. I offered to sew some decorations by hand, maybe bake a few things, but Lily's mother politely declined every time. "Oh, don't trouble yourself, Mrs. Carter. We've hired professionals for that." At the rehearsal dinner, they all looked perfect, polished, elegant, flawless. I wore a modest navy blue dress I had saved for years. When I approached the table, I overheard one of Lily's cousins whisper, "Is that her? She looks ordinary." My heart sank, but I kept my smile. I didn't come for their approval. I came for my son. During the ceremony, when I saw him standing at the altar, my eyes filled with tears. He looked so happy. For that moment, nothing else mattered. But happiness doesn't always last long. A few weeks after the wedding, Lily's parents started visiting often. They'd make subtle remarks about how my son should upgrade his lifestyle, a bigger house, a better car, a new circle of friends. One afternoon, I overheard Lily's mother telling him, You have to move forward, dear. Some people will only hold you back. I knew she meant me. That night, I cried silently, not because they insulted me, but because I felt I was losing my son to a world that measured worth by appearances. But life has its own way of balancing things. One day, a phone call changed everything. The call came on a Wednesday morning. I was having tea by the window, watching the neighborhood kids rush to school, when my phone rang. It was my son. His voice trembled slightly. "Mom," he said, "Lily's dad needs a favor. There's an important business contract he's trying to secure. And, well, it's with your company." For a moment, I didn't say anything. My company, the same one where I had quietly worked for over 15 years, managing investments and evaluating partnership proposals. I was one of the senior consultants who reviewed major deals before they reached the boardroom. I could almost hear the unease in my son's silence. He continued, "They don't know, of course. I mean, they still think you're just doing small office work, but they asked if you could maybe put in a good word." I smiled softly. "Of course, dear," I said. "Tell them I'll see what I can do." When I hung up, I sat quietly for a long while. I thought of every dinner, every forced smile, every condescending glance from Lily's parents. I thought of how small they had made me feel, and how hard I had tried not to show it. And yet, there it was, life's quiet sense of irony. 2 days later, I arrived at the office early. The proposal from their company was already on my desk, awaiting evaluation. I read through it carefully. Their plan was ambitious, but flawed. The numbers didn't quite add up, and the risks outweighed the promises. Under normal circumstances, I would have simply flagged it for revision, but this time, I paused. I wasn't driven by revenge. I didn't want to humiliate them. I just wanted them to understand something far more powerful than wealth, humility. So I made a note. Request a direct meeting with the applicants before final decision. That Friday, my secretary informed me that Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery, Lily's parents, had confirmed attendance for a formal presentation. When the day arrived, I dressed as I always did for important meetings, a crisp charcoal suit, pearl earrings, hair neatly tied. My badge read, Evelyn Carter, Senior Investment Consultant. As I entered the boardroom, I could see the Montgomerys, standing near the presentation screen, rehearsing their pitch. Their confidence filled the air until they turned and saw me. The color drained from their faces. Lily's father blinked twice, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Mrs. Carter," he stammered. You work here." I smiled politely. "I believe we've met," I said, taking my seat. They exchanged nervous glances, the kind you give when you suddenly realize the ground beneath you isn't as steady as you thought. The CEO entered and greeted me warmly. "Evelyn, glad you could join us. We value your insight on this one." Then he turned to them. "And you must be the Montgomerys. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know Mrs. Carter is one of our most trusted advisors. She'll be leading today's review." Lily's mother tried to smile. It came out as a nervous twitch. "Of course," she murmured, her voice barely steady. I listened quietly as they began their presentation. They spoke of projections, partnerships, and growth strategies. But behind every number they quoted, I saw something else. Pride. The same pride that had once looked at me and seen someone small. When they finished, I thanked them politely and asked a few simple questions, the kind that exposed the weak spots in their plan. They fumbled through the answers. The silence in the room grew heavier with each passing minute. Finally, the CEO leaned forward and said, "We'll review everything internally and get back to you. Thank you for your time." As they gathered their things, Lily's mother turned to me and whispered, "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" I met her gaze, calm and composed. "Because I wanted to see who you were before you knew who I was." Her eyes glistened with shame. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. After they left, the CEO chuckled softly. "I think that family underestimated you, Evelyn." I smiled faintly. People often do when they mistake kindness for weakness. That night, I received a message from my son. "Mom, they told me everything. They didn't know you were, well, who you are." They're embarrassed, but also amazed. Lily said her mother cried after the meeting. I replied simply, "It's okay, dear. Some lessons are best learned quietly." Days passed, and the final decision on their proposal came in. The board agreed their plan needed revision. It wasn't rejected, just paused until they corrected the flaws. I ensured my notes were fair and objective. I didn't want revenge. I wanted growth. The next weekend, Lily and my son invited me over for dinner. I hesitated at first, unsure of how things would feel. But when I walked into their home, Lily's mother was there, waiting at the door. Her expression was humble, almost fragile. Double quotes Mrs. Carter. She said softly, "I owe you an apology. I misjudged you. I thought you were beneath us, but now I realize how wrong I was." I smiled. "It's all right. Sometimes it takes a little distance to see clearly." We sat down for dinner, and for the first time, the conversation felt genuine. There were no polite lies, no hidden judgments, just real people, learning to understand one another. Later that evening, as I was leaving, Lily's father approached me. "If you ever reconsider joining our advisory team," he said sincerely, "we'd be honored." I laughed softly. "Thank you, but I'm happy where I am." As I walked to my car, the cool night breeze brushed against my face. I looked up at the stars and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Because in that moment, I realized that life doesn't always need confrontation to deliver justice. Sometimes, you just have to stay silent long enough for the truth to echo on its own. And when it does, it speaks louder than anything you could ever say. Days turned into weeks after that dinner, and slowly, something shifted in my son's life, in all of our lives, really. Lily's parents, who once treated me like a stranger, began calling occasionally. Sometimes it was for advice, sometimes just to ask how I was doing. Their words had changed. Their tone carried respect now, not obligation. Lily would visit me on weekends, sometimes alone, sometimes with my son. She would sit beside me in the garden while I watered my roses. "You know," she said one afternoon, "I never told you how much I admire you." I smiled, looking at her, this young woman who had once been hesitant to meet me. "Admire me. For what, dear?" "For everything," she said softly. "For your patience, your grace, and the way you handled people who didn't deserve your kindness." I laughed gently. It's easy to be kind when you understand where cruelty comes from. It's always born from fear. Fear of being less, fear of losing control, fear of not being enough. She nodded, her eyes glistening. "My mother's changed, you know, after that day at your company. She's different, quieter." She told me she never realized how shallow she had become. "People change when they're shown a mirror," I said. "Life does that better than anyone else." A silence fell between us. The comfortable kind. I could hear birds chirping, the wind playing with the leaves, and for the first time in a long while, I felt proud, not of my position, not of my work, but of who I had become through it all. Later that week, my son came over. He seemed nervous, like a child who had done something wrong. "Mom," he said, "I owe you an apology. I was embarrassed before. I thought the world would judge me for where I came from. I forgot that everything I am came from you." His words pierced me in the sweetest way. I reached for his hand and smiled. "Son, don't be sorry for wanting more. Just remember what you have means nothing if you forget who you are." He nodded, eyes filled with tears. "I won't forget again." Life went on, and slowly, all the wounds stitched themselves into quiet scars, reminders, not regrets. Months later, I was invited to a gala dinner hosted by the same company I worked for. It was a grand event. Chandeliers, fine music, people dressed in their best. My son and Lily accompanied me. I noticed Lily's parents there too, greeting people, humble and polite. When they saw me, they walked over with genuine smiles. Lily's mother embraced me lightly. "Evelyn," she said, "I meant every word that night. You taught me something money never could." I smiled. "What's that?" "To never mistake simplicity for weakness," she replied, "and to treat people with dignity, no matter where they come from." We stood there, not as two families divided by pride, but as people who had learned painfully, beautifully, how respect truly works. As the night went on, I stepped out for some air. The city lights shimmered below, reflections dancing across the glass buildings. I thought about my late husband and how proud he would have been to see our son married, happy, strong. And I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the humiliation, the silence, the moment of revelation. All of it had shaped me into someone calm, unshaken, and wiser than before. Sometimes, we think power comes from shouting the loudest or proving people wrong, but I learned that real strength comes from not needing to prove anything at all, because when you know who you are, no one's opinion can define you. That night, as I left the gala, my son walked beside me. "You know," he said softly, "you're the most powerful woman I've ever met." I chuckled. Powerful? Me. I just lived long enough to understand that kindness doesn't make you weak, it makes you unbreakable. He smiled and slipped his arm around me. As we walked toward the car, the night breeze carried a calm warmth, and for the first time in years, everything felt right. At home, before going to bed, I looked through an old photo album, pictures of my son growing up, my husband smiling, our small house that had once felt like the whole world. I closed the book and whispered to myself, "You did well, Evelyn. You didn't need to raise your voice. Life spoke for you." The next morning, I woke up early, brewed my tea, and sat by the same window where years ago I had once cried, thinking I'd lost my son to pride and wealth. But now, as sunlight poured through the glass, I smiled. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's peace, the kind that comes when you forgive, but never forget what you learned. And in that peace, I finally found myself again, not the poor naive woman they once saw, but the mother who stood tall without ever needing to fight. The world hadn't changed much, but I had, and that was enough.